Hello and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about present tense subjunctive verbs in Spanish. So first let's talk about what is a mood. You may be familiar with the idea of a tense because that has to do with time. However, verbs often conjugate for more than just the time and the person and the number that they're describing, but also for the mood. Mood in language basically describes certainty or attitude towards something. In Spanish, there's two moods, the indicative and the subjunctive. In English, there's only one. So let's talk a bit about the subjunctive versus the indicative. The subjunctive describes things that are uncertain, and we're going to see the rules for how you use the subjunctive in Spanish in a second, whereas the indicative is describing things that are certain. So if you can think of it as indicative, like you can indicate it, versus subjunctive, it's a subjective things are not certain, that could perhaps help you remember how and when to use these things. In English, the subjunctive does not exist, so it's a bit difficult for English speakers to get their mind around it, but after we go over today's video, hopefully you'll have a better idea. So the pattern for the subjunctive in Spanish is very similar to the pattern for regular verbs in the present tense, so it's just root plus vowel plus s, root plus vowel plus mos, root plus vowel plus is, and root plus vowel plus ron. However, keep your eyes peeled because you're about to see something interesting happen. So let's take a look at this. So if you notice the endings for hablar, they look like an ER verb, with the exception of the first person singular. So you have hablé, hables, hablé, hablemos, habléis, hablen. So then one of the notable things about the subjunctive in Spanish is that it switches the verb category from one to the other. So we have our AR verbs versus our ERIR verbs, and our ERIR verbs versus our AR verbs. So our AR verbs will essentially become ER verbs when they're in the subjunctive, which I think makes it a little easier to think about. You can observe this happening as well with coma, comas, coma, comamos, comais, coman, and viva, vivas, viva, vivamos, vivais, vivan, where they have turned into what is essentially AR verbs. So when do we use the subjunctive? Well, you can remember when to use it with this acronym right here, WEIRDO, which stands for wishes, emotions, and personal expressions, recommendations, doubts, and ojalá. So let's talk about when to use with wishes. So whenever you're saying that you want something, so for example, if I tell my students, I want you to do your homework, often my students will not do the homework that I assign them. So in this case, you can see where the subjunctive is describing something that is, not certain. I want the students to do the homework, but they don't always do it. So whenever you have a verb that describes a thing that you or somebody else or something could want or desire, then the verb that follows it should be in the subjunctive. Another thing you'll notice in our example here is this que. The word que almost always, subjunctive verbs are almost always preceded by a que. Quiero que estudies español. Now here's the emotions. Estoy triste que nunca llueva. So here in New Mexico, it often doesn't rain, and that makes me sad. But that doesn't change the fact that it's not raining, or it might actually rain. Sometimes once or twice a year it does rain. So there's our good example for emotions. Estoy triste que nunca llueva. In personal expressions, this is a bit of a catch-all term for a variety of expressions, but they'll usually be something like SX, that, something, something, something. So for our example, it's important that you talk to your family. Es importante que hables con tu familia. Right? I can tell you es importante que hables con tu familia, but you could just straight ignore me and not talk to them. A lot of people do that, but that doesn't change the fact that the talking is still in the subjunctive mood. It's uncertain. It could happen. It could not happen. Here we have recommendations. Recomiendo que pruebes la comida Cajun. Cajun food is amazing if you have not had it, so I recommend that you try it. I recommend that you try Cajun food. But you might not, right? So I recommend that you do it, but you might not. So here we are, recommendations. Doubts. Dudo que viajen tanto. I doubt that they travel so much, but they might travel that much. So whenever you're doubting something, once again, make sure to use the subjunctive. And finally, ojalá. There should be an accent mark on that, on the A on the first ojalá. Ojalá is an interesting example, and it kind of falls into the desires category if you really want to. The etymology of ojalá is inshallah, which is Arabic for I hope to God or I wish to God, something along those lines. However, that inshallah turns into ojalá in Spanish. And as you may or may not know, Spain used to be ruled used to have Muslim rule for 700 years, depending on where you were in the peninsula. So Arabic has had a large influence on the language, and we can even see it with this singular word that will almost always have a subjunctive preceding it. So one of a famous song by I want to say it's Juan Luis Gabriel. I don't remember his name for certain, but there's this famous Dominican song called Ojalá que llueva café en el campo. So he hopes that it will rain coffee in the country. It's a very interesting song, very beautiful song, but I recommend you listen to it. But anytime you use ojalá, just remember it means I hope to God. And so that's why you will have the subjunctive following ojalá. I hope that you found this video helpful, and muchas gracias y hasta el siguiente video.